drama, and that the Brexit drama unfolded. And I've known Ulrich since many years, and we've been talking about the developments over the many years. And I have to say, his word of analysis and advice in 99% of the cases became reality and was true. And also the outcome he predicted pretty early, that there will be a deal in the last minute. And I remember him saying also, yeah, this deadline will be postponed, and there's another deadline, and there will be another deadline. And I couldn't imagine it, because I thought it cannot be so chaotic. This cannot be the British way of doing things. But and also the European answers, I think, has a role to play. Anyway, I think we all know what's the topic. What's at stake is nothing less than, some said the existence of the European Union. That was one famous quote of our UK Prime Minister Johnson. Yeah, he said the UK will collapse. It didn't so far. I think what is at stake is we have about 5% of Lithuanians working in the UK. And there was initially a bit of a return, and we might talk about the migration issue a bit later. But the exodus has not yet happened totally. And there were some initiatives from Estonia to attract companies and to settle over, because they have this e-Estonia one-stop, very genius system. But maybe we'll talk later about it. I don't want to take more of precious time of Dr. Hoppe speaking, and without further ado, I hand over. The floor is yours. I'm very happy and proud we can do this together.
Thank you very much, Florian, for your kind words of introduction. And it's more than a decade, it's more than 2 decades I've been to London. So, but that makes me feel young, so that's very good. It's interesting doing this webinar together, because I'm a native from Bremen, and the Bishop Albert from Bremen is always regarded as the founder of Riga. So there is a linkage from my hometown to the Baltics. So, and I think from the Hanseatic cities or so, there's always a strong linkage to all the 3 countries in the Baltics. And as Florian is always a bit younger than me, a bit more modern in terms of technology, I thought I'd start off my presentation with a short video. So it's not a promotional video, so don't worry about it. It is just 30 seconds, and it has been created by my nephew in Berlin. He's an aspiring filmmaker, and he sent me that for New Year's Eve. So here we go. So this was it for a video, and I think it has 2 connotations or 2 messages in there. And it's Rule Britannia, and it is Brexit is now, if we talk to the British government, to the British establishment, it is about sovereignty. So it is about independence from the European Union, independence from being independent from regulation. And you saw this wording there, remember the brothers who suffer from our separation. This is, if you know Bremen, it's on the marketplace, it's one of the old buildings there, and this inscription was done there to remember Germany's separation after the Second World War. And this separation lasted for 44 years, and maybe we see Britain joining the European Union in 44 years. So who knows? So that is the big question. So I've already answered 2 potential questions in terms of what's it all about and what the future will look like. I will just give you a few initial comments on the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, so the so-called Free Trade Agreement between the UK and the EU, which was concluded on Christmas Eve and then came into being on 1st of January 2021. And I will talk a bit about the effects on the trade on goods, and in terms of trade on services, talk a bit about data protection issues, because that is important for digital trade and so on. And I know the Baltics are very strong in terms of digitalization and so on. I will then also talk about the issue of immigration, the ending of free movement of workers and people. That is a key issue for many European countries, but also for the UK. And then I will talk just briefly about some tax issues, so to give you a rounded picture in terms of what we can expect. And then a few last words on what the Trade and Cooperation Agreement hasn't achieved, because that, I think, is also important. And really, can we say that this agreement was a success for both sides? Who knows? The future will tell. It is, in any case, it is much better than nothing. So if there hadn't been a free trade agreement, I think we would have had not just customs tariffs and potentially also quantity restrictions on exports or imports, but I think the atmosphere between the United Kingdom and the European Union and its member states would have been far more difficult going forward. So it's not an easy relationship going forward in any case, but I think not reaching such an agreement would have been really difficult for future cooperation in many fields. So this Trade and Cooperation Agreement, it is offering the chance for more talks in future, and also more agreements on various issues. So I think that there were a few issues left out which are very prominent. That was, first of all, data protection. So the European Union has in the meantime issued an adequacy proposal, adequacy decision, but that still has to go through the individual member states until that is actually then coming into existence. And then the second key issue is in terms of financial services. There is currently no equivalence being agreed between the UK and the EU from the EU side. So the passporting, which a lot of financial services firms used from London to actually serve the market in the European Union, that is no longer in existence. And there hasn't been an agreement on this in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and it is supposed to take place, this kind of agreement, over the coming months. So let's see whether that will take place and whether that will be a meaningful equivalence agreement. The UK, on the other hand, has already issued an equivalence for EU financial services companies, but the EU is a bit more hesitant there because they always fear that the regulatory framework will be undermined by freewheeling bankers from London. And of course, this Trade and Cooperation Agreement offers the chance for more, but it really is just a chance for more. We should not forget that. And that really depends on how both sides will react in the future. So from the UK's point of view, we know that the present British government is largely made up of Brexiteers, and they all had to kiss the ring in terms of being for Brexit, even if they weren't in the first place. And they will still be in government for give or take another 4 years. So that is the scene set in terms of their belief, their motivations. And we don't know what the EU will do in the next few years, whether there is a proper willingness to engage with the UK, to engage with a government, with an administration which is very much pro-Brexit. So that remains to be seen, whether there is actually a chance that we'll have far more areas of cooperation in future. I doubt it. So I think the agreement will stand as it is, and that will be it, and we'll iron out a few differences which hadn't been concluded in that short time. But we, at least in my opinion, we can't expect many more additional agreements which make the UK staying close to the European Union. It is, in the end, it is only a thin agreement, even if it has 1,200 pages. There isn't much in there. There's a lot of annexes and so on. And it is really only a thin agreement because it was the issue of sovereignty versus the integrity of the single European market. The British government, in the end, just wanted to have sovereignty, and the European Union was really insisting on the integrity of the single market. And sovereignty sounds like a good word, but how do you have a sovereign state in an interdependent world economy? So that's very difficult. We see how the UK will operate with that. But that's the key motivation currently of the British government. When we recall the referendum in 2016 and the campaign beforehand, there were really three issues. It was a lot about immigration, too many people largely from Eastern Europe coming to the UK, and somehow the populists used that to create this kind of feeling that some Brits felt overrun. And then there was the issue in terms of that the UK pays too much in the European Union. So these issues have more or less gone away. So I think this, how shall one put it, this anti-immigration sentiment is no longer that prominent in the UK. That has fallen by the wayside, even if immigration is still as high in terms of 300,000 people coming to the UK in terms of net immigration every year. So the composition has changed a bit. It's a bit less from the EU and a bit more from other countries, but it's still there because the UK economy needs skilled workers. They still need to import people. As I said, a thin agreement, not much more can be expected in the years to come. What has happened in terms of the influence on trade on goods? As I've said, we have no customs tariffs and we have no quantitative restrictions. But we have formalities because it is not a membership of the single market. It is just a free trade agreement. So rules of origin need to be adhered to, and there is a customs border in the channel, and that creates formalities for all companies doing exports and imports, and leads to extra costs for companies, be that in the B2C business or in the B2B area. And what we already see is that for a lot of smaller companies, it becomes too expensive to serve the UK market. And also the other way around, for some British companies, it becomes too expensive to serve the European market. But probably less so for British companies because the EU is a market of 450 million. And for an EU company, the UK is only, in inverted commas, a market of 66 million. So that shows a bit of the difference. But we've already seen that a lot of online traders no longer actually deliver to the UK because very often they need to register for VAT purposes, they need to have a customs agent, and that all adds up to the cost, and especially if the UK market isn't that important for them. So because then the fixed cost of having these administrative processes in place is just too high and it's not worth it. And we've seen that right from the start. A lot of companies never thought about it, but it became quite clear when, from a UK perspective, DPD, one of the parcel service companies, stopped delivering to the European Union just after New Year. They've restarted that again because the UK companies couldn't fulfill all the formalities because they didn't read the trade and cooperation agreement between Christmas and New Year. It's always a holiday period. And I think it's the other way around as well, at least from a German perspective. I don't know what's it like from the Baltics, but I think that it was DB Schenker, which also stopped deliveries to the UK for 2 weeks, and they still see difficulties because it's important not just for large companies, but largely for smaller companies. So if you are logistic companies and you have 50 different consignments on your truck and one isn't declared properly, then you have a problem. We've seen that in terms of the companies we advise, so the larger companies who send full truckloads to the UK, they were able to fulfill the regulatory requirements in terms of having a rules of origin proof and so on, because for them it's easy, but it is far more difficult for a logistics provider really who collects consignments and sends them over. So we see a lot of companies, smaller companies, disappearing from the UK market. And what does that mean? So there will be less competition. It was one of the ideas of the single European market to increase competition by allowing small and medium-sized companies to trade across Europe. And that has now become far more difficult from a UK-EU perspective. So something, if Margaret Thatcher was still alive, she would turn in her grave on that, because I think that was her project driving the single market, and that's really a reduction in competition. And I think we see the extra cost, and the larger companies will be able to deal with. They will probably be able to pass on the cost to the consumer. It will be largely the British consumer who will then actually pay for these extra administrative burdens. But what we also see is not just the customs formalities being an issue in terms of the administrative costs, but we will also see that some sectors really fear the regulatory divergence which the UK is probably going to pursue, because it is about sovereignty. Sovereignty means setting your own rules and regulations. So if you want sovereignty, you will probably use it. And that means your regulatory framework will, over time, diverge from the EU framework. And that creates extra costs. We've seen that, for example, in the chemical industry. So you all know the EU REACH system in terms of the chemicals regulations and registrations. The UK has set up a very similar system called UK REACH, but did not get access to the EU database because there are a lot of patent issues in there. So companies really have to re-register all their chemicals in the UK. And for example, that leads to extra administrative costs of £1 billion, so give or take 1.2 2 billion euros for the chemical industry in the UK, just to fulfill the paperwork of re-registering all the chemicals. And then we have this in terms of pharmaceuticals, medical supplies. You have extra regulations. You need to have a representative in the respective other markets. So these are costs which are on top of the pure customs formalities which companies have to bear. What we actually haven't seen, and I think that was widely predicted by some, is the disruption at the border, especially at the roll-on, roll-off port of Dover-Calais. That hasn't happened, but that's probably largely due to the fact that, first of all, due to the coronavirus pandemic, trade has probably been shrinking by 10% across many European exchanges, but also that because of the anticipated deadline, lots of companies were building up their stocks and their warehouses to ensure that they can continue to serve their customers, be that in the UK or be that in the European Union. So it remains to be seen how that will develop over time. The British government has recently said, oh, the number of trucks which go through Dover-Calais is probably on 99% as it was in January last year. I don't believe that figure, because if trade has shrunk by 10%, we can also expect that will be 10% less trucks. So, of course, one cannot do this straight comparison because we don't know about the value, but just as a simple mathematical calculation, it doesn't add up. So I think we see less trade and companies are more careful. But I think what we will also see from 1st of April onwards, when there will be the first stricter customs import regulations coming into force in the UK. So products of animal origin will now have to be properly checked at the border. So these checks were for the last 3 months slightly less so. So that will become more difficult. And then also there were lots of easing in phases in terms of when you have to fulfill, or when you have to actually hand in your full customs declaration. And there were companies were given time to do that. They can do this a few months later. But from 1st of July, they have to do this when they actually import goods. So that will put an additional strain on the customs system here in the UK. It was always there on the way back, and that was always a problem why lots of trucking companies didn't want to go to the UK, because they fear they don't get their trucks back, because on the border in Calais there will be proper controls, because it's the European Union. There is a law which needs to be abided by the customs officers in France. So we've seen that reduction, and it will be interesting really to see how that will develop over the summer. And we also know that the systems in terms of IT, the processes in the UK administration, but I think also on the other side, they aren't running that smoothly. So there's lots of disruption there. Companies don't get proper advice from the authorities how to deal with it. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty, insecurity on how to deal with it, which also has an effect on trade. But looking forward 12, 18 months into the future, all these formalities will at one point sort themselves out, because people will at one point know which form to fill in and how to hand it in. So that really is not the issue. Really the issue is the extra cost, which will remain there, and also the regulatory divergence, which will make it more expensive to do business with the UK, and it will also make it more expensive for British companies doing business with any European Union member state. Just a few words now on trade and services, which is very often forgotten because we don't really see it. I've already mentioned financial services, that the passporting for UK-based banks has fallen by the wayside from 1st of January. Let's see how that will develop. And that we've also seen that the recognition of professional qualifications, there's still a lot of work to be done, and the Brits wanted more, but the EU wasn't willing to give them more automatic recognition of qualifications. So something has fallen by the wayside there as well. And more importantly, it is really the immigration law, which makes the provision of services, especially if you look cross-border services where you send people abroad, will make it far more difficult to do so in future. And I think both sides haven't really thought about this, how interconnected the European continent is in terms of trade and services. And services we don't see. We see containers in the ports, we see trucks, we can emotionally understand that, but services we don't see. But there's a lot of technical services going back and forth across the channel, and there will be lots of visa requirements in future, and some services will not be able to travel across the border because the British immigration law has put in a lot of problems there. So if you provide just a service to the UK and you have to send people there, your UK customer has to have a sponsorship license. You have to, and they have to grant you certificates of sponsorship so that you can actually send your people over. And your people then have to have a university degree, they have to be with your company for at least 1 year, and they have to have a 3-year experience in terms of their professional experience. So that will be difficult in a lot of fields, especially if we look at the, let's say, more modern industries where the employment relationships are far more fluid, where people come and go within companies, and that will actually create an extra burden on trade and services in the years to come. Will we see some kind of easing of restrictions there? On the UK side, there are also restrictions on the EU side. So it's both sides have issues there, which I never thought about. I don't see much easing of restrictions on the UK side, because the UK is slowly moving into an immigration system very similar to the US, so actually quite harsh in terms of controls and checks. And that is a key issue going forward if you are in the service business. And we've also seen that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement has some kind of provisions for cross-border services, has got some kind of provisions for business travel, which then actually haven't been implemented into the UK immigration law at the moment. So that is a key issue also going forward. Can you rely on the wording of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement or not? Because it is just a bilateral or an international agreement. It doesn't have automatic legal function in the UK. So it's still the UK immigration rules, even if they don't follow the Trade and Cooperation Agreement to the full extent, they will be applied by the immigration officers. So there's a lot of uncertainty there, insecurity for companies when they send people to the UK. The normal business travel is not a problem, going to meetings, signing contracts, etc. Or the European Union citizens are non-visa nationals, so that can all be done. But the devil is in the detail. If you start to install machinery, if you've just sold it and haven't produced it, then it will become far more difficult, and there's a lot of uncertainty there still. And the British administration is probably overwhelmed with all these new regulations which they have to put in place, and haven't gotten round to it, or don't want to go round to it, get round to it. So these are the issues one has to look out for, especially when you enter into new contracts. So there are challenges ahead for a lot of companies, and the immigration issue really is one of the key issues, and that is actually the ending of free movement, which I think we've underestimated how integrated we were in the European Union, including the UK. And that is a key challenge for the UK in future, because there's always a lack of skilled workers. Where do you get the workers from? There was a reason why lots of people from Eastern Europe came to the UK, because the UK didn't have enough workers with the right skills and imported them. And they haven't, over the last 20, 30 years, they haven't built up the skills base to that extent that they can actually replace them. Will they ever have a skills base to do that? I don't know. So I think they've been working on it for the last 50 or 60 years. And as you learn in every MBA program under human resources or so, when we look at applicants, so past performance is still the best predictor of future performance. So if you haven't done it the last 60 years, is it likely that you will do it the next 60 years? Probably less so than people want to believe. So I think that really shows that the UK will probably, over a 10-year, 15-year time horizon, open up again. Not over a 5-year horizon, because it's always been an open country, very much based on trade, less so on industry, even if the Industrial Revolution has started here. But some people have always said the Industrial Revolution, that was more an accident that had happened in the UK. Really, it is a trading nation, it's a global nation, and it needs people coming in and out of the UK, especially if we look at London, Greater London being a marketplace, not just for banking, but it's for shipping, it's for trade, it's for insurance, it's largely for law, and very importantly also for ideas. And we see that with the tech companies like the Googles and the Facebooks. They continue to invest in the UK because they see that as a marketplace for ideas and the world language, which also helps the UK as a location. And English becomes more and more the world's language, even if the French don't like it. So therefore that is an asset going forward. And what we should also not forget is it is a rich country, 66, 67 million consumers. And it's interesting, going back 20 years, the UK had 60 million. That's what I even learned in school. It was whatever, 59 million. But over the last 20 years, the UK has grown from 60 to 67 million. So that is really the immigration of 300,000 people per year. And that, of course, our 6 million new consumers, of course, has created all these problems in terms of public services, because the government actually didn't invest in public services to cater for this new immigration, but because they just reap the benefits. But of course, you have to give something back to your citizens as a government. But that is a key issue for the future. That is a key issue for the UK government. The Boris Johnson government has won its last election to a large extent in northern England and former Labour, so left-wing strongholds. So they really are now committed to levelling up, so really to have a more equal wealth and economic activity distribution across the UK. Whether they will succeed remains to be seen, but this is their political ambition, and there's a lot of infrastructure investment planned in the future. Let's see how that will materialise, but it is quite a big task to carry this out. But I think we will see more public investment, and I think the UK government, being a Conservative government, has really now spent a lot of money in terms of the COVID crisis. It has a GDP deficit last year of 17%. So that's a huge number in a European comparison. Of course, the UK economy shrunk by 10%. It's also one of the largest negative impacts on any European economy or worldwide economy. But of course, as the country is a bit more service-oriented, a bit more consumer-oriented, so with government support, probably really grow a bit quicker in the years to come if they actually support consumption in the UK. And the current continue to borrow a lot of money, which is of government, but they've actually changed their policies, and we can expect, I think, more support from the government, and also to keep the economy going, because the government also needs to somehow manage Brexit and the effect on the UK economy and the COVID crisis together. Of course, they can somehow muddle it up and blame one thing on the other, but the UK voters will hold them responsible for actually getting the country back on track. And therefore, I think we'll see lots of initiatives, and we will see, in terms of regulatory divergence, the UK will try to become or continue to be an attractive location for international investment, maybe not by becoming a Singapore on Thames, as people have always feared, in terms of lightly regulated environment. I think they will use smarter regulation, so really more in terms of outcome regulation. What do we want to achieve? The continental Europeans always have this idea that we need to regulate every individual step, and the Anglo-Saxons really don't want to regulate every individual step. They really want to achieve an outcome. And I think that is what the UK will continue to actually now be able to do to a much larger extent. And that will give them a lot of competitive advantage, because it is for companies much easier to deal with simple regulation than with very detailed regulation, because that eats up a lot of intelligent management capacity, which you should rather use to actually promote your business. And that is the strategy going forward for the UK, and that might offer opportunities for a lot of companies also from the Baltics, because as I know, you are very much into digital services, digital developments, and I think the UK, as a UK government, has always been much more digital than in comparison to Germany and many other European countries. There's less of a fear of using electronic services in terms of interacting with your own government and so on. So I think there will be huge opportunities in future as well, even if it will be slightly more difficult and more expensive to do business across the channel. On that note, I would like to close, because I think we've just got another 10 minutes left for questions. And I would like to thank you all very much for listening to me, and I'll hand back to Florian for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. That was an impressive, very comprised overview, and filtering the most relevant information and giving us also a bit of how it looks really behind the scene and hands-on what is going on in real terms. And I think, there's still a high uncertainty in the room. And this will, I think, only clear, as you has with your words, in the coming months will become a bit more clear. The fog will lift from the Thames. Now, I just checked the chat and the Q&A section. We don't have anybody being active there. No questions yet. Is there somebody who would like to take a question by raising the hand? Then that's also an option. Just do that.
I can answer one question, if I may, because that came in earlier, and that was, I think, the question from one of your participants in terms of, will we see that some people from the Baltics go back to their home countries? I'm doubtful about that will happen to a large extent. What you will probably see less immigration to the UK, because that will become more difficult. And of course, you will always have some people naturally going back to their home country or seeing opportunities there. But I think in terms of the brain drain, which the Baltics might have seen, you are far more an expert in that than I am. So that will not be reversed, but it will be stopped. And of course, some people that they've made their livelihood here, they've got good jobs. If they're really clever people, they will continue to have jobs. And of course, they have all these opportunities from a global marketplace. And that's what I said towards the end of my presentation, that is the big asset of the UK, and especially Greater London, in terms of how we can actually have more growth from these digital developments or pharmaceuticals, all these future industries. And that is a key focus also of UK government efforts, really to focus on the future industries. So, and there will be continued possibilities for these people who are already here. So I don't see many people going back because there are opportunities somewhere else. They might go back for personal reasons and so on. That is, of course, a different matter. I don't see this happening. And that hasn't happened, I can only say from a German perspective, that lots of people who are originally German have left the UK to go back to Germany. It's, of course, you have the odd story because somebody is no longer happy, but some people are never happy, or happiness changes or so, and then they want to go somewhere else. But we haven't seen that to any sizable extent, that Germans have left the UK going back to Germany because they had good jobs. They came here, not as people said in the referendum campaign who were advocating Brexit, that they came here because of the welfare state. No, they came here because there were so many more opportunities than in their own countries. And they've capitalized on these opportunities and will continue to do so.
Yeah. We have one question, and I mean, just adding on this dimension, I think they also have to take into account the pull factor, the pullback. In the case of the Baltics, we had huge salary wage increases in the last 5 years, almost 2 digits, 3 years in a row. And that led to just being also the conditions here in the Baltics more attractive for returnees. Yeah, and then one trigger, anecdotal, is always some family issue. Yeah, the parents get sick or have to be taken care of, and then they return for family issues, and then they end up staying back home, and they find out it's not so bad as it was 5 or 10 years ago when they left. But that's only anecdotal. In total, we can say that the Baltics have all now turned around. We have a net immigration coming back. Yeah, we get more people, or it's plus minus 0, and before it was losing each year for some between 0 and 10% even of population in the worst years. Now we have another question concerning the plant products. Can you please tell when the regulation for plant products, wood pellets, wood packaging, will have to undergo stricter control? We have a strong wood producing industry here in the Baltics, and I imagine that lots of stuff is going, be it pellets, be it packaging, be it raw material. do you, I mean, I know you can't be an expert on every detail, but maybe it's a question you have an answer on, and if not, yeah, how can we, and what are the services also your chamber offer in case there are more detailed questions also in the follow-up, where I can get information? Do you have experts? Is there a phone I can call, or do I write an email to the AHK in London?
In terms of the pallets, and I think that's the issue, that the wooden pallets need to be sprayed in a certain way if they come from outside the EU. Inside the EU, they don't need to be sprayed, but as the UK is no longer inside the EU, they all need to be sprayed. And that's a key issue. I don't really know when this will come into effect, but if you just want to drop me an email, we're happy to look it up, or maybe you can find it on our webpage from the chamber under Brexit FAQs.
Martins, I think I can promise that we can follow up on this together with our colleagues in London. So that's, I like it. It's very concrete. And I think it's also one of these absurdities. If the sprayed pellet comes from Europe, goes over to Dover, and then unloads the machinery in Manchester, and then the same pellet comes back, it's already contaminated, yeah, by non-European whatever, and needs to be probably sprayed again. Yeah, that's the system they have put in place. Ulrich, is that the case?
No, I don't think it needs to be sprayed again. I think
okay.
it is the issue, as far as I understand, that's an important issue, is pallets from the UK, can they come to the EU if they're not sprayed? So they have to be, and that will be checked at the border. So they need to have some kind of mark on the pallet. So they then actually have to be stowed on the truck in a certain way that the inspection can actually see, is it a sprayed pallet or not, when it comes back.
Okay,
so
Martin,
that's
follow up on that
issue which was well known, but nobody really thought about it.
I have a question concerning the financial sector in the UK. It accounts for a massive portion of GDP, about 6, 7, 8%, but also 10% tax return. And how are the prognosis of what will be the euro or the Brexit effect on the financial service? Is it going to be endangering London's position as #1 financial service center in the world?
No, but it will have an influence. And of course, it was the issue right from the start, was about sovereignty. So the UK government wanted to rule over their own fishing water. And fishing is 0.1% of GDP. And for having a bit more of 0.1% of GDP, they actually harmed the 7% of GDP, which is the financial services sector in total. Will that be massively influenced? Yes, to some extent, it has been influenced by things moving to the continent. And I think Amsterdam has become now the largest share trading place for European shares. Have taken that away from London. But the question is always, where's the advice given? Where does the booking take place? And so on. So these are headline news. And I think a lot of financial centers on the continent, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Paris, and so on, they hope to attract a lot of investment from London because of the discontinuation of the passporting. That hasn't happened to the extent all these financial places were hoping for. Yes, some banks have opened up offices, subsidiaries, and so on, but the effect is probably much smaller than they hoped for. It remains to be seen how that will work out in the longer term, because the regulatory authorities have already said, no, you can't just open up a subsidiary with 2 people. We want to have somebody there who can actually sue in court and so on, and they need to be relatively senior. So we might see a bit more of that. But I think what we also see, and that's the problem largely for US banks or Japanese banks, etc., who operated from London. So they're already the larger ones on the continent, but some of their activities might move back to their headquarters, might move back to New York because they already have a thick layer of expertise there, and doing it in a fragmented way from London, Frankfurt, etc., then they just do it all from New York. So I think what we see similar also in terms of Asia, we see these 2 marketplaces probably gaining from Brexit. The continent will gain because of regulatory induced investment, but that just means that financial services just become more expensive because it's more fragmented. Everybody will pay for that, but I think the other centers outside the EU will benefit more. And that goes for a lot of industries. If we look at biotechnology, etc., all this, which then also will look at the larger markets, the future markets. And that's a problem also that the EU, in terms of its growth performance, wasn't a star performer over recent years. So I think that is also an issue. And what the UK will also do is that they will set or work on their regulatory framework. And just to put it very simply, after the financial crisis, and I mentioned already this talk about regulation, the continental Europeans, they regulated every step of financial services, whereas the British regulator also, simply speaking, said the boys and girls on the other side, they're so much cleverer, they earn 10 times as much, they will always be quicker. So we cannot regulate every step, we just say you need to hold more equity. So with the cruder measure, they try to create a buffer which also provides security for a financial system. What will work better in the end, who knows? But this cruder system needs less intellectual capacity, less management capacity, which you can then use for your entrepreneurial activity. And I think that's what London is going to try in future as well, in terms of fintech being an attractive location. And they've already had this kind of idea of having a sandbox where you can like play without much regulatory compliance. They've always talked about it. It wasn't that big, as they've always said, but that is their approach. And with a simpler regulation, they will try to attract other financial services firms in different sectors and new financial services. So I don't fear for the position of London as a financial centre. And I don't know, they might have lost 20,000 jobs or so, but I think they have 700,000 jobs in financial services. If they have a normal shakeout in a crisis, that they fire 70,000 people. So it's not that big. So and they will try to mitigate the effect of losing some business to Europe by being more open to others. They were really after the Chinese in terms of getting the renminbi trade to London, but of course with Hong Kong and the Uyghurs, they have all sorts of issues with China. So that remains to be seen how that's going to work out. But they will actively look for new business opportunities and try to use their regulatory power to attract these businesses to London as a financial center.
Yeah, talking about the sandbox, which London is still thinking about, this sandbox is already active since 4 years in the Baltics, in Lithuania. There we had a very innovative head of the national bank, and they created the sandbox and created very good, easy, low threshold entry conditions for fintechs. They have now a cluster of 230 fintechs there in Lithuania, and they have banking license, and they can then also get a European license through that. So keep that in mind in case there is somebody, he can have entrepreneurial freedom and spirit and the European access.
The Brits already also have the sandbox, but okay, they always talk about it to an extent which oversizes it. It's not that big, but I think they will tend to grow this more.
Yeah, really... sandboxes are always small.
Oh, very small.
Compared to the beach, let's say.
Yeah.
We have one last question, and I think that's also a nice closing one. What about the future of the car assembly plants in the UK, Ulrich? I know you have some smart things to say about that.
Yeah. So it's twofold in a way. So if we look at the trade and cooperation agreement, both sides were relatively clever. And in terms of the rules of origin requirements, they lowered them for electric vehicles, really to that we have a trade in electric cars across the channel, and that they've lowered it, and that they do this in stages until it goes away, really to attract battery production either to the UK or to the EU. So both had the same interest of getting battery production into their own respective territories. So there we see less disruption, and that has enabled also the Japanese to say, oh, we continue with Nissan, which is one of the largest factories in the north of England and one of the largest car producers in the UK. But in terms of the overall assembly production, it was always not going very deep into the value-added chain. So if you look at the German car industry, I think 60% of the value-added chain takes place in Germany with German products, whereas in the UK, I think it's around 20 or 30%. So even if you see the car coming out of a UK plant, most of the parts come from somewhere else. And that's why the UK car industry, whoever owns it, was very much concerned about Brexit, how that's going to influence them. And I think we'll see a slow shift of production away from the UK. That is my prediction, because it is too small a market. It is not economical then to produce here if it's outside the EU, and to serve other markets from here. So all these car manufacturers already have car plants in other areas for whatever reason to serve different markets. So I think the car industry is worried. It will not go away, but it is negatively influenced by Brexit and will continue to be negatively influenced by it. But it's also the declared interest really to shift away from diesel or petrol cars to electric cars. So one can't judge what's then the biggest effect and how the UK car industry will look like in 20 years. So the targets of the UK government are very ambitious in terms of electrification of transport, but I think the UK governments, be they Labour, be they Conservative, they love targets, and whether they will always be met remains to be seen. The UK has always been better at target setting than target meeting. So, but if you don't set targets, you don't get anywhere in any case. So the motivation is there to do something, the willpower is there, and if they manage 80% of that, I think they're also doing fine. And we've seen that with the vaccination process. That was really a sign in terms of the advantage of the UK as an entrepreneurial nation, where we just get up and go, we just do it. We don't get bogged down. We see the urgency, we need to do it. The vaccine is safe, it might not work 100%, we don't know yet, we just do it. Whereas the Europeans, most of the European Union member states are far behind. And then there was this idea from the European Union to forbid the export of the AstraZeneca vaccine to Northern Ireland. So nobody in Germany wants to take it. So in a way, it's a bit of a joke how the European political system has operated in that area. And that actually gives the UK government another position saying that Brexit was a good idea. We've been able to be much quicker. We didn't have to follow European Union rules. We could start our vaccination program 4 weeks earlier. So that really is an advantage of being free from this broader framework, which slows everybody down. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But that's an argument which is very difficult to counteract.
Yeah, if you apply it to the 27 member states and everyone is on their own, in the case of the Baltics or Romania or smaller countries, I think that's a bit of this dilemma that you are how do you say, a Trittbrettfahrer, a free rider, and I mean the vaccines. If the European Union had taken as aggressive policies that the vaccine should not leave, which is produced in the European Union nowhere, or I mean. There's, I think, a whole complexity behind it, but of course it's used for the propaganda and for the populist and for the PR of the government, and it shows that reality is a bit more complex. And I mean, who would have thought Cameron saying to 2015, we give the population a simple choice, in or out choice, he said. And now we see how complex the simple in or out choice really is. And probably there will be not a clear winner, but there will be, everybody is losing and then catching up, and maybe eventually just change and become a bit different. And I found it very interesting. Ulrich, thanks so much for this view behind the scenes and really being on the pulse of the moment and sharing your 2 decades of experience. I didn't want to make you look so old, but you still look so young, so that's okay. And we send you lots of love to England. We're gonna now have a cup of tea. I think it's tea time here. And hope to see you soon in real. And yeah, we invite all of your members to come to the Baltics, and we sure also will keep the trade going with the United Kingdom. And I wish everyone a successful week. And yeah, let's stay safe and healthy. And thanks for your attention, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Ciao.